You've focused a lot and written a lot about teaching writing to students with learning disabilities. What are some best practices that teachers can use in teaching writing to these kids?
Okay. I'm going to start off on the transcription end, but it's not necessarily the most powerful of these. But one of the things that we often see with kids with learning disabilities, not all of them, but we see with many, is that they struggle with spelling and handwriting early on. And it has a number of negative consequences for them. One, if you can't read the message, you can't get it. Second, if the message is illegible, there's a lot of spelling miscues, people will devalue what you say. And third, difficulties in this area interfere with other writing processes. So if you have to think about how to spell the word while you're trying to construct a sentence, it interferes with that sentence construction process. So one of the things that a number of people have found is that if we provide some extra attention to these skills, now I'm not talking about going crazy here, okay? Because we want to have a balanced approach. We don't want to have writing instruction that's all handwriting and spelling for young kids. That would be disastrous in my opinion. But if we provide some extra attention there, it often pays off in very strong ways. Kids' spelling gets better, their handwriting gets better, and there's carryover effects in terms of sentence construction, how much they write, and often in terms of the quality of what they write. So we get something back for our buck, so to speak. The other area that I think is very important for us to focus in on is how you go about becoming facile in terms of forming sentences. And it's important that we model that process. And a common way of doing that is to take smaller kernel sentences, model how to make those into more complex ones, have kids work with you to do the same thing, have kids work together, and then have them apply that in their own writing. And then finally, I think something that's extremely important is that we help kids become familiar with how to carry out the processes involved in planning, revising, monitoring, evaluating. We show that directly, we help kids master those things, and we encourage them to use those things.
You know, all of you have talked about how many elements there are in good writing and a good instructional process for teaching writing. Is there a difference between the approach you'd use to help students who are struggling with mechanics versus students who are struggling with putting concepts together? Okay. And how would you do it differently? Okay.
First, the assumption is that the two are not related, and actually they are. So kids who struggle with mechanics often don't create as much text. So it can be a cause on the text creation side. It can be an interfering factor. But I think the way that you'd go about this also is going to change somewhat depending upon the student. So if we think about a kid who struggles with mechanics as a starting point, I would provide some extra focused instruction to help kids move past that point. So with something like handwriting, we're going to focus in on letter formation or fluency depending upon what the problems are there. With spelling, it's going to be more complex. There's also going to be some kids we're going to be looking for alternatives for by the time they start hitting second and third grade. So I'm going to use an example with my daughter. My daughter was a kid who struggled with spelling and handwriting mightily. One of the things that happened was in second grade, she started working on a word processor. Now she flies across the keyboard. Didn't help the spelling problem that much, but it certainly helped. Yeah. Well, the spell check maybe is not as powerful as we'd like to believe, but it really did help her in terms of the fluency issue. And then for some older kids, sometimes word processing isn't the answer either. So sometimes in high school, for these older kids, we're looking at another compensatory technique, which might be speech synthesis. And I didn't mention that with younger kids because they often have high squeaky voices and they're not very accurate with kids like that. Now, in terms of the content generation end, which you talked about, like I said, it may be a problem in part because of the mechanical end. I mean, obviously, if you struggle writing the words, you're going to produce less, and so that's one of the issues. But sometimes on the content end, it's a structure kind of thing or a knowledge kind of thing. If we ask kids to write about things they don't know a lot about, then we put them at risk in terms of what we're hoping to see in the product. We need to teach them ways of organizing their ideas, how to get those ideas. So it's going to be a different focus. It's going to be on getting content and organizing it and thinking about it and what will be useful in the paper and what will be useful for the reader to hear in terms of your purpose for the text.